So, Rich, today we have a really interesting case. We're coming back to the Villisca Axe Murders, a case that we have analyzed before, a case that we're going to analyze again, but we have a very special guest with us today. We are pleased to bring into the show Ed Epperly from the book Fiend Incarnate, a very detailed account of the Villisca Axe Murders of 1912. You and I have both read the book. And I'm excited to dive into this interview, Rich.
It is an interesting book. Not only does it tell you about the tragedy of Villisca, Iowa, but it tells you about the time,
Yeah.
about what it was in Middle America in the early 20th century, 1912, and how things developed in that particular, as we say here, that particular neck of the woods. It's an interesting comparison with what went on here in New England around the same time, and we've investigated cases from all over, early cases, early 19th and late 19th and early 20th century cases. And it's interesting to see the comparisons in culture, comparisons in community, and this one is very interesting.
So I would like to formally introduce and welcome our guest today, Ed Epperly. Ed, thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to Zoom in with us and go over the Villisca case.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, so are we. I've spent the better half of 2 weeks dissecting this book and analyzing every detail of it. So I have a lot of questions. I think Rich has a lot of questions as well. And I guess I'm going to open it up with, how did you get introduced into the Villisca case? What was your introduction to the case? And what eventually, convinced you to write a book on it?
Well, I grew up about 100 miles from Villisca, in a small town, very much the same size as Villisca. And I was born in 1935, which was about 15 years after the last litigation related to the Villisca murder happened. And so it was still in the air and the atmosphere. Iowa had never experienced a murder like it in terms of violence and unexpected, the killing of children, things like that. And so I had heard about it. I grew up with it in a sense, although nobody in my relation really knew anything about the murder. They just generally said, "Do you remember that big murder over in Villisca?" And then they would talk about what they knew. I went to Iowa State Teachers College at that time, which is now Northern Iowa University. And there were three of us, all three of us from that little town, and all three of us were history majors. And so when we were seniors, that would have been in 56. I might have said 55 in the book, but as I've worked with it in presentations like this, I've checked records, and we really did it in 56 in the spring. We went to our teacher in an Iowa history course and asked if could we do some original research, something other than just library research, secondary materials. And she said, "Sure, that'd be fine if you want to. If you do it as a project, you'll all get the same grade. So if you're satisfied with those rules, you can do it." And we talked about what would we pick, and somebody suggested the Villisca murder. That's been forgotten over the years. The other two are dead. They can't defend themselves. And so perhaps I'll claim it, but I can't prove it, that somebody suggested it. And we made, as I recall, 2 trips to Villisca that spring and that semester. And we had the advantage of a lot of people who were intimately involved with the case and the litigation that came later were still alive. And so we interviewed, the first doctor on the scene, Dr. Cooper. He was still practicing. He was a man of 70, 75, but he was still alert and had an office downtown. And it's interesting because went up a big long stairway to second floor, probably 18 feet ceilings. And the room was dark. He was sitting back at a roll top desk with a little, if it had a green eye shade, I would have thought he was a reporter. But he looked out and said, "What do you boys want?" And we said, "Well, we were looking into the Villisca Axe murder. I won't talk about it." He said, "It split this town for 40 years. I don't want to say it. I just won't talk about it." And we were crestfallen and said something to the effect, "Well, we understood you were one of the first doctors on the scene." And he couldn't help himself. He turned around and said, "I was the first." And then he talked for an hour once he got started. It was that kind of a case. It dominates, even today. You can't meet anybody on the street of Villisca who doesn't have an opinion as to who the murderer might have been and who it wasn't. And they will know a lot about the murder, some of it true, some of it not, in my judgment. But anyway, that's how we got started. We also talked to the prosecuting attorney in the Kelly trial, which occurred in 1917. We talked to the sister of the murdered girls, the Stillinger girls that were murdered. She was still alive. Not really very interested in the event. She proved to be a rather, uninteresting interview in my judgment. Again, all of this is my opinion, I guess. And on the basis of those interviews and reading newspaper accounts, we wrote the paper. We were smart enough to let Leo, who one of the three, write it. We stayed out of his way. Leo went on for a PhD and ended up as a vice president at McGraw-Hill Publishing. He's made a very successful academic career. So we got a good grade on the paper. Much better than if I'd have tried to write it. Anyway, with that start, I got interested in the case, and Don Brown, who was the other one of the three, he and I worked on it for about a decade. And we gradually got a little more sophisticated on preparing for the interviews more carefully. Everyone said there were no records except newspaper accounts. And we at first believed that, but then as we worked with it, we started to find records that the local records were squirreled away, actually, but a lot of them came out over the years. And gradually I had, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And so I started attracting attention as someone who knew something about the case. And in must have been about 92, I guess. I'd been working with it for 30 years and hadn't written anything, article or two. But I got this call. I was sitting in my office at Luther College in Decorah, where I taught for a number of years. And it was from a disembodied voice from Hollywood, no less. And proved to be a young couple who wanted to start doing documentary filmmaking. And they had seen me make a presentation on a TV station in the Quad Cities. And they were originally, she was from Waterloo, he was from the Quad Cities. And they were back on a visit. They'd been working in Hollywood. He worked for Sony Pictures and she worked for Los Angeles Magazine. And they asked, would I be a consultant on the film? And of course I would. They couldn't have kept me away if I had a chance. And so I did that, and we became fast friends. It took them 10 years to make the film because they were paying for it as they could raise a grant money, or as they could get a gift, or as they could save up money from their jobs. And I was not on salary. I got a share of the proceeds, like the old whalers. I'd get so many barrels if they got any whale oil. Well, they finally put out the film. I think it's by far the best film that's been put out about the Villisca murder, called, it's been a while, Villisca Living with a Mystery, because of its being unsolved and so on. And it was a comprehensive documentary, full feature-length documentary, 120 minutes, something like that. And I got to appear on camera a little bit, but the most fun was going with them to Villisca while they did interviews. And my primary function on that was to kind of guide them a little bit as to what materials were available and share what I had found, and also to run a little interference in Villisca. It's a controversial thing when somebody from the outside came in. Some of them they accepted, some they didn't. And I had made some good contacts, and so I kind of I helped them get some pictures, although most of them they got themselves and so on. Well, at the end of that, they've gone on and made many documentaries now. It's a successful company, Fourth Wall Productions. And they talked to me. They said, "You really should write this up. A lot of this is going to be lost if you don't write it." I had never done any writing in my life to speak of, other than interdepartment memos and sprightly things like that. And so I was hesitant, but they said, "If you write it up, we will provide the illustrations, and we will take it through the press." They had put out 2 or 3 books already related to topics they had worked with. So I labored along for 10 years and finally got them a manuscript. When I sent it to them, I just sent it right off of the computer, of course, and most of it I'd written in hand and then re-entered. But I got a note back from Kelly Rundle and Tammy were their names, and he said, "You know how long this is?" I said, "No, I don't. I just, wrote until I felt satisfied." And he said, "Well, we set it up in book form, standard size, and it runs to 770 or 737 pages." He said, "There's no way we can afford to publish that. You can never sell it at that length." I said, "You mean you want me to cut it a little?" He said, "Yes, I would." So I did a first cut that got it down to 500 pages. And they said, "Well, it would sure help if you could get it down another 100 pages. And so I did a second cut that got it pretty close to that. And then I don't remember what the book sits behind me, but I don't remember how many pages we ended up with. But we did get it finished and published it through Amazon. I went on a book tour in Iowa. It's fairly well known in Iowa. And I went to libraries and we made them an exchange. I didn't take any money, but I could sell books. And basically we sold about a third of the crowd.
And
very good. Going to small Iowa libraries, that meant sometimes we sold 1 book since there were only 3 there. Other times we sold 20 books. If we went to places like Marshalltown and Waterloo, towns of several thousand, and you would get a crowd of 60, 70 people. And so I would tell the story and answer questions and sell books. And Amazon continues to handle it, and I get a little check from Amazon every month, and once a year I send a check to the people who did the illustrations. And the illustrations I'm quite proud of. I mean, I didn't do them myself, and so some of them I had gathered, but most of them they gathered in conjunction with their film. And we also, with the marvels of electronic publishing, you don't have to gang all your pictures in a center part of the book somewhere, or 2 or 3 gangs of pictures. We were able to put the pictures where they occurred in the text, and that made it a lot more, in my judgment, a lot more useful. So as you can see, I'm a laconic person. I give very short answers, not a bit loquacious.
Nothing wrong with that.
I don't answer everything, but that long. But once I get started, I tell the whole story.
It's all good. I just checked. It's 413 pages, so you did pretty good.
We got it down, because they wanted some space to put in illustrations, because that was just text that I had.
Yeah. Oh my God. Rich, you're up.
Well, the illustrations made the book.
I thought so.
From where, when I read it, I spent a lot of time looking at the pictures and the fact that they're embedded, rather than, as Ed said, in the middle of the book somewhere. They're in the middle of the story, and that really makes a difference. And it went to show not only who the participants, who the combatants were in this whole sordid tale, but it also showed you about Villisca and about the area. And that's really important to me. And maybe that comes with age. Maybe that's why Ed and I are being close in age. We appreciate the fact that it brought me to Villisca.
Yes, I feel the same way.
And that's so much part of the story that is often left out of the story.
Yeah.
The context of where it happened. I have a question for you, Ed. And what do you think, as this whole idea got started with you writing the book, what do you think, in the case of the crime, it seems like something happened and it went off the rails investigatively very early. And can you give us an idea of why that might have happened the way it did? How the whole crime scene got out of control?
Sure. You might as well have had a alien spaceship land in the town square to the way the town felt when the murder happened. It was completely out of their realm of experience. I mean, they had never even conceived of anything like this. You had 8 victims, 6 of whom were 12 or almost 12 and under. So you had 6 children killed and 2 adults for apparently no reason. If you would have asked anybody in Iowa in 1912, do you think there'll be an axe murder where these people were completely mutilated in a town in Iowa, or a town in America, really, for no apparent reason, and they would have been completely flummoxed. I mean, they would not have believed it would be possible. So it came as a bolt out of the blue. That's one thing. Secondly, there was not very much violent crime at that time in that area. they had been no murders in Villisca since the 1870s, in where a man was psychotic and killed his wife, and there was no question about who did it or anything. It was just a blow up, a psychotic blow up in the house, and he was sent to the mental hospital. There were fights. I mean, I grew up same kind of town, and it was not unusual to have a fist fight out in the street. You didn't see it every month, but every year somebody would get angry and there would be a tussle. But the idea of violent killing was unheard of, really. The second reason, the town marshal, Hank Horton, pretty good man. I mean, he was a decent marshal, as far as I could tell, but he had been a carpenter before he became a marshal. And before that, he'd been a farmer. And consequently, he had no police training. There was no institutes that would give him training. It was just to learn on the job. He took over from a experienced marshal, and there were certain records they had to keep and things like that. And there was no investigation anywhere in Iowa, at least, at that time, that is comparable to what we think of routinely. There wasn't a piece of yellow crime scene tape in the state in 1912. They had a fingerprint expert come the next day from Leavenworth Penitentiary, but that was about there was very little fingerprinting being done at that time, 1912. It started with actually been discovered in the mid-19th century back in India, I think. One of the civil servants in India learned that finger lines on the fingers were unique to the individual. And then they spent 50 years trying to figure out how to classify them so that they could use them. Because if you get 100,000 prints, you can't sit there and look at each one and compare them. You have to have a technique, a coding system that will let you reduce it to 20 prints or something like that. And that had been completed at Scotland Yards, I believe, in 1907. I'm an approximate historian. I got a pretty good idea of when it happened, but I'm never 100% sure unless I look it up, and that kind of breaks up the continuity of the presentation if you have to thumb through a book. But anyway, he came drunk when he arrived. They had to help him off the train, and they took him out to the Stillinger home to meet the Stillingers. That was the two girls. They were visiting that night. They were not members of the Moore family, not related. And they couldn't get him out of the car. He was dead drunk by that time. And so they took him back to the town, and they said it took about 6 hours to get him sobered up enough. But he did do a relatively sophisticated analysis of the scene. And not many people pay much attention to it because they don't get by the fact that he was drunk when he arrived, but he wasn't drunk the next day when he did that. He tried to get fingerprints. He could not get them. The house had been contaminated already. We can talk about that in a moment. But he measured very carefully blood spots to determine where the axe struck and where the axe was being wielded. And the bodies had been removed, but the beds were still there in situ. They were not cleaned up or anything yet. That took place later in the week. The bedding was all destroyed and burned and things like that. But people didn't have any sense of they collected no fluid, no body fluids, or didn't collect any blood samples. The blood typing was not done yet, and they didn't have any. That was yet to come, and of course, DNA analysis was 60 years, 70 years in the future before you started getting that. So within the limitations they had, they didn't do as much damage as you might think. They had Marshall Horton came down, saw the scene, and then he went back up town. It's about 4 blocks to downtown, and that was primarily to alert people and to get reinforcement, so to speak. He put in calls to the county sheriff and the county attorney, the county coroner, the state of Iowa attorney general, people like that, and some of the townspeople gathered to talk about the murder and should they get bloodhounds, and they called for bloodhounds, but they had to come from Beatrice, Nebraska. It didn't get there until that night. Meanwhile, everyone who heard about the murder went to the murder scene. They estimated there were 1,000 people at the surrounding the house within an hour. And it's a town of 2,000 to begin with, so large numbers went, although they started streaming in from the farms and other towns. Horton left his deputy, his night marshal in charge, Henry Overman, Mike Overman, who was, I think, 26 at the time. So he was a young man. And with these dozens upon dozens of people there, they started creeping. When Dr. Cooper walked out, he came out from going through the scene. He said that the front porch was full of people, and they were peering in, and some of them had the door open and were getting ready to ease in. And he said, "Boys, don't go in there." He said, "You'll regret it for the longest day you live if you go in there and see that scene." But he left. He went back uptown, and they did go in. And an hour and a half later, 9:30 or so, Lindquist, who was the county coroner, had arrived from a neighboring town. He didn't live in Villisca, and he was working inspecting the bodies, and he said it was a madhouse. People were running from room to room and shouting, and the axe moved around the house. It was left at the scene. That's a murder weapon. It was left in the downstairs bedroom, but some people carried it upstairs. Some people reported seeing it up there. Others thought that was in the living room. People picked it up, moved it around, things like that. And he said to the Overman, he said, "Why in the hell don't you get these people out of here?" And Overman said, "I can't do it. I push them out the front door and they come in the back." Well, that went on till about 10:30, I suppose, at least 2 hours, maybe 3. And then Sheriff George Whitmer from Page County, that's the county south of Montgomery County. It's the last county before the Missouri line. And Corinda is the county seat. He came up and he saw the scene was out of control. And so he deputized a dozen men, and they pushed everybody back off of the yard, and they put a wire cover or fence. They just single wire they stretched around to keep people out. And so the investigation was nothing like. They didn't measure temperatures. They made an estimate as when they were killed. The doctor picked up one of the bodies and let it fall back on the bed, and to determine the degree of rigor mortis that set in. He also looked, this is Cooper, he also looked at the blood, and it had a sheen to it, which he said develops about 6 hours after the blood is expended, and pretty rough measurements by our standards. And on that basis, since it was about 7:30, maybe between 7:30 and 8:30 that all this was going on, they estimated it was sometime around midnight that the murder occurred.
What were some of the politics going around in Villisca that may have been involved in this case? Was this crime, these murders, was this a crime of passion, or was this a political advancement? What was the reason for these murders, and what were some of the politics flying around in Villisca?
That's why the community split. The people, as I have said, had no expectation of ever hearing or seeing anything like this. And so the town was just people just stood on the street corners talking and theorizing and suggesting and all of that. The first theory was that it was a serial killer there had been murders similar. This was the fifth murder, a serial murder that had occurred in the last 10 months. The first one was in Colorado Springs. The second was in Monmouth, Illinois. The third was in Ellsworth, Kansas. The fourth was in Paola, Kansas, on Wednesday before the Sunday murder in Villisca. And then the last one was the Villisca murder. And they had been written up in the newspapers, and everyone had read about them. And they suspected that there might be a serial killer loose in Midwest. And that was pretty much the dominant theory for the first month after the murder happened. In fact, the week of the murder, they called together the sheriffs. They had the sheriff from Monmouth and Colorado Springs and Paola and Villisca met in Villisca and compared the murders. And what do you think? Are they the same or not? And they couldn't reach an agreement. Some of them thought that they were very similar and probably done by the same person. Others thought that one of them at least thought that they weren't all that similar, and it was just coincidental that we'd had a series of axe murders at the same time. So that theory was kind of dominated the discussion for the first month. But then it started to fade away. And it faded away because it didn't really lead anywhere. They didn't know who it might be. No one had seen anyone. We just have to wait till they kill again. And that wasn't very satisfying. And the people were desperate to achieve justice. As they said, we've got to have justice for these children. We can't let a person like this can't escape. So there was a lot of motivation like that. The second theory started even earlier than the first, and that was that there was a local man, a wealthy man, a banker, state senator, F.F. Jones, and he was behind the murder. Now, nobody thought that he did the murder. He didn't shovel his own sidewalk, really. And consequently, he was a banker. He was a second in command of one of the largest bank in town. He owned a hardware and implement dealership and was one of the wealthiest people in town. He wasn't the wealthiest person, but he had a lot of money. And he had gone into politics. He had been an Iowa state representative for, I think, 3 terms. And then he became a state senator. He was in his first term as state senator. he was an air, and I talked to I talked to a guy who knew him personally, interviewed a fellow, and he said F.F. Jones was an arrogant son of a bitch. And that's exactly the way he put it. He said he walked around with his nose in the air and was he thought he was better than everyone else in town. I think he was smarter than most people in town. There's no question about that. So he had a bad reputation, and everybody knew that his daughter-in-law, his son, he had two sons. One of them had died in a railroad accident. He had been a brakeman on the railroad. They had two railroads in Villisca, both of them CB and Q. That'd be Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. One ran east and west, the main line, which is still there. It's now the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and it's the Amtrak line that runs through Iowa. And it had a branch line that started in Villisca and ran down to St. Joe, Missouri, I think. And so there was a lot of railroading in the town. I think I read a timetable that showed that there were 42 trains went through Villisca every day on the railroad. Not all of them stopped, but many of them did in those days. They had several passenger trains, east and west, and north and south. But anyway, his son had been caught in between two cars in a switching accident in downtown down to railroad yards back in the 1890s, and his ribs were crushed, and he punctured a lung, and he got pneumonia and lingered for months but died. And so his only son married a woman, Donna Bentley, came to town in 1909, I think, as a school teacher. And she was, in the words of the same guy, she was a hell of a good-looking woman. You bet she was. That's when I asked, well, how would you describe Donna? And she was also what they would call in those days a high stepper. She was vivacious. She would josh with men and punch them in the ribs if she wanted to. And you didn't do that very much in rural Iowa in those days. And but the thing that she was really got the Joneses involved was everyone in town knew that Joe Moore, the murdered man, was having an affair with her. At least he was coming over and visiting her when her husband wasn't home, and sometimes wasn't even in town. And they knew that because they arranged their meetings over the telephone. And the telephone girls, they were all women in those days, many of them very young, they were a switchboard, and when the phone came through, they unplugged the connection and plugged it into the proper one, and the thing, they had a hearing device so they could hear what was being said if they wanted to. They could flip a switch and listen. And Donna was receiving calls from at least 3 men in the year before the murder. I don't have a precise date. They didn't record or wouldn't testify, but they all testified before the grand jury. And they said, well, what would they say? And she said, well, Joe Moore would say, is it all right if I come over now? And she would say, sure, come on over. Or sometimes she would say, no, he's here, meaning her husband, of course. A few months after the murder, the light went on the switchboard, and the telephone girl switched it and was listening, and it wasn't a phone call, it was a fight. She could hear shouting and scuffling in the room, and pretty soon she heard a shot, a pistol shot. And what happened was that one of Donna's callers, Albert Davies, had come over and visited her after the murder and in the fall. And her husband had come home unexpectedly and they'd gotten in a fight. And one of them was carrying a bulldog pistol and pulled it out and fired and hit him in the thumb. I always thought that Freud might make something out of that, but I didn't develop that line of research. Anyway, he was. There's an article in the local paper, Villisca Review, saying that a local insurance salesman was injured last week. He had a new horse, young horse, that was fractious, and when he had his hand in the harness ring, the horse reared up and nearly tore off his thumb. But everyone in town knew it had been hit in the living room at the Joneses with a pistol shot rather than.
How far away were the houses? Like, we live south of Boston, so my next door neighbor is, 20 feet from where I'm sitting right now. So how far away are every property? Like, if I shot one of my guns off in my living room right here, it would set every car alarm off in the neighborhood. So I'm just curious, like, how close are the neighbors?
Well, they're not quite that close, but they were not. It's a city or a town. They didn't have really apartments. Each were individual houses, and and lots weren't very big. I don't know. The murder house sat on the corner, the southeast corner of a block on the northeast side of town, and the house next to it was about 20, no more than 30 feet away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they were a typical lot would have perhaps 4 houses on the block on each side of the street, sometimes 5. Quite often it'd be a alley down the middle of the block that would divide it. So sometimes you had 2 on one side and 2 on another. Sometimes you would have 3. If the houses were small, it'd be 3 on one side and 2 on another. Sure. And of course, if the houses were big, F.F. Jones, the wealthy banker we're talking about, his house was almost 3 stories high. He had a large attic on top of a 2-story house, and he had a half a block that was his property. So it varied quite a bit.
Rich, you're up. What do you got?
One of the things that developed this case, and it seemed to be a polarizing case, was the Burns Detective Agency. And their detective, who was a guy by the name of James Wilkerson, as I read, how did he happen to get involved in this case and wind up being one of the central figures in the aftermath of the investigation in the years following the murders?
Well, the state of Iowa did not have a Bureau of Criminal Investigation at that time. The Attorney General of the state was in charge of criminal investigations if they rose to the state level. Very few did. Most of them were handled locally by county sheriffs. The sequence was the county attorney was the chief officer. Under his direction, well, the sheriff was relatively independent, but they coordinated, I guess you would say. But occasionally there would be a case that was serious enough that the state attorney general would get involved. They would, when you got a case like Villisca, almost certainly the state attorney general would be involved, and the county attorney could call for help at any time. And so from the very beginning, the state attorney general, Colson was his name at the time of the murder, George Colson. He had assistants who worked for him, and they would be sent out as investigators. Many of them had been county sheriffs, and then he would hire a county sheriff who was experienced, and he would become a state investigator, but it was on an ad hoc basis. He would be working in the Des Moines office most of the time, but then if a big case occurred, well, they sent agents at the very beginning, but they were not particularly trained as investigators. They were a step above anything else we had on the local level, but they still weren't better. So they turned to actually the Burns Detective Agency, which was it had just made a name for itself by breaking a labor case in Los Angeles in which there was a bombing of the Los Angeles newspaper. I think Los Angeles Times, isn't it? Los Angeles, whatever. And had been bombed by labor agitators. There was a lot of labor conflict at that time between 1900 and 1920. And Burns had broken that case and captured the bombers. And out of that, he became a well-known investigative agency. He had a Kansas City office, so they contacted Kansas City, and Kansas City sent a man named Toby. That's his last name. He was a trained investigator, quote, whatever was known. It mostly involved interviewing people and looking for connections, anyone witness that had seen anything. They really didn't take any kind of forensic material in those days. But anyway, they came at the very beginning. They were there first week, and they were hired for a month or two, pretty expensive. And when they didn't get it solved, they stopped. But the families of the murdered persons continued to agitate to solve the case and put political pressure on them and raise money, donations. Stillinger himself, who was a fairly wealthy farmer, he donated at least $500 in one shot, and he gave money over the years. The Moore family had 15 brothers and sisters, 11 of whom had reached adulthood. And so that family was agitating for the government to reopen the case. And they did that in 1914, 2 years after the murder. And at that time, they sent, which they said was one of their best agents, which was James N. Wilkerson, who is a character of his own. We don't have time today or any day to cover. He came to town posing as a Texas land agent. As he put it, he was going to sell the best land in the world to the best farmers in the world. It was down on the Rio Grande Valley, down at Far, Texas. That's PH, not F. Far, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And he spent a month undercover talking to everybody. And he'd make a pitch about the land, but then he'd say, now you had a big murder here, didn't you? Oh, yeah. And then they would talk about it. And I've said, I think I said in the book, that he canonized the rumors. There were thousands of rumors, and most of them were bizarre. We look at, currently we have all of the internet hubbub, and we have all kinds of theories about every event of major nature. It didn't have anything comparable except they talked all the time. And as the county sheriff said, everybody had a theory, and they would pass it on as soon as they had it, and the next person would receive it and add to it. And so it was just this wealth of rumors. And he spent a month quietly windrowing those and narrowing it down to the ones that he thought were sensible and he could build a case against the banker, because he decided very early that the banker was behind it and had hired a killer to come in and do it because of the affair that was going on between his son and or his daughter-in-law and murdered man. And the people of town knew that. The 15 minutes after the word got uptown, there was a guy named George Bloodgood who was had been a blacksmith in town. He just sold the blacksmith to another person, and he was back at the blacksmith shop that morning. And here came F.F. Jones and two friends from downtown to the murder house to see what was going on. And he said, I looked up and saw F.F. Jones as he walked by, and his head was down and his face was flushed. He was walking fast. And I said to myself, oh man, you know something about this. So he was a suspect right as soon as the murder happened. But he never was a suspect in most of the moneyed part of town. They didn't believe he could possibly be involved in anything like that. It was mostly coming from the lower socioeconomic class and the rural class, the farmers, because they had heard it. And Wilkerson put all these rumors together into a coherent case about here was his motive and here's who he got. And he picked a man named Mansfield, Wilkerson did, who was exonerated of there was an axe murder in Blue Island, Illinois in 1914. And that murder was Mansfield's estranged wife and daughter and her parents, father and mother. 4 of them were killed. Mansfield had deserted the family and was working in a packing house in Milwaukee at the time. And so Wilkerson said the murders were identical and Mansfield had committed them both. And that became his case. He was manipulative. He would manipulate people. He was a stump speaker of later on, when they were accusing Kelly and the man they tried for the murder, he went on a speaking tour all over Southwest Iowa. And by that time, the Attorney General had become a major opponent. The Attorney General was prosecuting Kelly, and Wilkerson was defending Kelly. And the Attorney General hired a pen writer, a court reporter, to go to these night, and he would have these meetings at night, Wilkerson would, and he would stand up and give the case against Jones and in favor of Kelly. And Wilkerson, so I've got transcripts of half a dozen of those meetings that was taken by the court reporter. And he would come over, he'd pat his vest pocket and said, I've got the documents right here that'll show that F.F. Jones put up the dirty money to pay for it, and insane Blackie swung the axe. He never pulled out the documents, but he claimed he had them. And then he was also, I have one line I couldn't resist. He said, they've got as much chance of convicting that little minister, that'd be Kelly, as a celluloid dog has of catching an asbestos cat in hell.
Can you tell me a little bit about why Kelly became a suspect and the story behind Kelly? Because as I read the book, it sort of came apparent that like he sort of like wanted to be caught because I don't know if he wanted to be caught, but he always talked about the case. He would talk about it over the fence with his neighbors. He would discuss it with anybody that gave him the time of day. And he was something that he was sort of like fanatic about. And I would like to hear about Reverend Kelly and about whether you think that it's possible that it was him who actually did this crime.
It certainly was possible. I can't, to my own satisfaction, I can't prove it. It was either a serial killer or Kelly. As I told one person, I threw half my life away trying to locate Kelly at these other murders, and I can't do it. But one of the problems I have with murders of this ilk, where it produces several books, for example, most people start out. They know that the question I always get asked when I make a presentation, sometime and generally pretty early in the presentation, was, "Who do you think did it?" They want an answer, and that's the same thing the people in Villisca wanted desperately, an answer as to who did it. Kelly was a young preacher in England. He was a Methodist at the time and was called by a Methodist synod, whatever it's called, in North Dakota. And he came to America in 1904 with his wife. He had been married, I think, 4 years perhaps. And he was an intelligent fellow. He was, nearly everyone acknowledged he was a good pulpit preacher. He was popular as a preacher. He was energetic, tiny little man. He was mentally ill, diagnosed schizophrenic. He was hospitalized in mental hospitals at least 3 times that I'm aware of. He was absolutely 4 times. He was absolutely psychotic when he was arrested and held in 1914, 2 years after the murder, for sending obscene material through the mail. He had, he was an early suspect. He was in Villisca the night of the murder. He's the only suspect that we can prove was in Villisca the night of the murder.
And he sort of placed himself there too. Well, I saw and I heard the thump of the axe. I saw, I was at the house and, the light, the street light or the lamp. Like he placed himself there, which was really strange.
Well, that's why he became a suspect.
Yeah, it's crazy to me because it's like if I was going to commit a crime, I'd be sneaky about it, I'd be moving under the stealth of darkness, trying to duck underneath all the lamps and the light and stuff like that. But this guy basically just says, short of having a flashlight on him and saying, "Hello, hi, I'm here," did everything in his power to let everybody know that he was involved in this case. To me, it's so crazy. And it really became super relevant when I read your book.
Well, he was in Villisca, came on Saturday night. That's the day before the murder, on Sunday night. And he came to preach in 2 country churches outside of down Pilot Grove and can't remember the other. Oh, I know. Number 10. It was a schoolhouse, number 10. and they didn't have a church. They used it as for their congregation. And these were small Presbyterian churches, because in the spring before, like in April, he left the Methodist Church and enrolled in a Presbyterian seminary in Omaha. As he put it, a man could starve to death working for the Methodist. He wanted to get a little more money. He thought he would join another denomination. And so he was going to start the seminary in September. He was dead poor. He had no money, he and his wife. They were childless. And the seminary president arranged for him to come to a small town in western Iowa, about 60 miles or more from Villisca, maybe not quite that far, Macedonia, Iowa, where he preached, or was going to preach that summer. And he was had to go every other week to Villisca to preach in these two country churches. So that the 10th of June or the 9th of June was the, it was the 8th of June, Saturday. He came in on the train supper time on Saturday night. And he went out to a country home, Enerson's home, Henry Enerson, where they had two young daughters and a old Norwegian grandmother who hardly spoke English, and Henry and his wife. And Kelly stayed overnight with them. And both the mother and the grandmother, and this I got an interview from the child who was preschool. She didn't remember much, but it was a family legend, and she had gotten it from her mother. Both the mother and the grandmother, by the time the meal was over and the sitting in the living room just talking, they were both upset with Kelly because of his actions with the girls, the children. And they didn't specify what exactly that was, but it seemed to have a sexual connotation because they didn't really want to talk about it. But it was serious enough that Kelly got a downstairs bedroom. The family slept upstairs, and there was a stairs leading up. The Norwegian grandmother was so upset that she did not go to bed. She got her rocking chair out and put it at the head of the stairs and spent the night sitting in the rocking chair because she was afraid he might come upstairs. And she said that he was restless. He spent the hours, she didn't say all night, hours, pacing in his room. She could hear him walking in the room downstairs. He went the next morning, preached at two country churches, and the Enersons brought him in to the Presbyterian church that Sunday night. And he got there at supper time, ate with the Presbyterian wife and family, Presbyterian preacher, his wife and family, and they all went to the Presbyterian church that night, which was having a Children's Day service where the Sunday school kids put on a program. And he sat in the back, right across Joe Moore, the man to be murdered in a few hours, was sitting on one side of the church, and he was sitting on the other, on the same row, I think. There was an aisle between them. They were in the basement, and the little kids were up in front singing hymns and Bible verses and things like that. And I know that Mrs. Moore, who is also to be murdered, she was the assistant director with the minister's wife that had put together the program. The Stillinger girls were there and in the program. So all of the 8 victims left the church and walked home. That was about a 2-block walk. They were pretty close to the house to get home. And they left the church sometime either shortly before or around 10 o'clock. It might have been 9:30, quarter to 10. And then were never seen until found dead. Kelly went home with the minister, and he claimed in his letter, he wrote letters. He left that next morning, the Monday morning. He left at 5:19 in the morning, which was when the train left, and the murder was discovered around 7:30. Before the Mary Peckham got nervous. She was the next door neighbor. There was no activity in the house. She finally went to the house and tried to peer in and couldn't look. The blinds were pulled down. She tried the doors and they were locked. She called Ross Moore, the brother of the murdered man. He came down, had a skeleton key, let himself in, walked across, pushed the door in the downstairs bedroom, and could see there were figures, 2 bodies in the bed. They were covered with the bedclothes, but he could see blood on the bedstead behind them. And so he knew that something was wrong. He went out. They called for the marshal, who came down, and the marshal went through the house and found all the bodies. Came out on the front porch and said, "My God, Ross, there's somebody murdered in every bed." And that's how it was discovered. We'll somewhere along the line in this discussion, we'll talk about the scene, which really revealed quite a bit about the in my judgment. Again, I'm not a forensic expert by any means, but it looked to me, at least, that the person who did it was being motivated by psychotic motives rather than rational motives. But anyway, let me I'll tie up Kelly a bit more, and then I'll let you.
Sure. Sorry. I did not mean to interrupt.
That's all right. Anyway, Kelly went home, and then he started a barrage of letters. And he wrote to, the ones I know of, and several of them I have copies of, but he wrote to county attorney, he wrote the county sheriff, he wrote the state attorney general, he wrote the Burns Detective Agency, he wrote to at least 2 private detectives I'm aware of, talking about murder. He claimed that he couldn't sleep and he went on for a walk. Kelly had a long history of window peeking. He was caught at it more than once, and he almost certainly was out looking for a lighted window when, in my judgment. And he talked about how the killer was disturbed during the process or after the people had been killed, and went out on the front porch because there were 2 people walked by. He heard that and so on. He claimed that I can't think of a good illustration, but the letters are full of information that it was difficult for a person to know without intimate knowledge of it. And so the police became suspicious of him within the first month, and they followed him quietly. They found that he had sent a bloody shirt to a laundry in Council Bluffs the week of the murder. And they also found that well, that's about all the evidence they had at that time. But there was suspicion that he had was a firebug, and that was proven later. He hadn't done. They didn't have any evidence for that at that time, but later, when he was preaching in Nebraska, he was suspected of it. And during his interrogation, the night he confessed to the murder, he desperately wanted to confess to the fires he had lit in Nebraska. It wasn't funny, I'm sure, but he was on the verge of psychosis under the pressure, and they kept wanting him to talk about the murder, and he kept confessing to these fires that he had set when he was living in Sutton, Nebraska. And they, oh, we don't care about that. Tell us about the murder, which he finally did. But anyway, because of all of that, he was a suspect. In the very late in 1913, he had moved and was now preaching in, he's back in the Methodist fold. He had gotten kicked out of the Presbyterian fold because he couldn't pay bills. He was running up bills not only with the seminary, but he was reflecting badly on the seminary because he would buy something and not be able to pay for it and so on. And so he joined the Methodists again and was preaching in Winter, South Dakota. And in January of 1914, which would have been a year and a half after the murder, he put an ad in the Omaha World Herald looking for a stenographer because he was writing a book and he wanted help with that. And a young woman, I think she was 28, she answered Jessamine Hogston. She answered his letter, and he wrote back and said, "You sound very good. You would work fine. There is one qualification, though. I will want you to work in private, and you'll be typing in the nude." And she found that a little odd, and she turned it over to her pastor, and the pastor turned it over to the police, and the police called the postal service, and they started sending him dummy letters, bogus letters, fake letters, expressing an interest in it, but tell me more. And his letters got progressively more salacious until eventually I think they exchanged something like 7 letters. He did one with Jessamine Hogston and 6 with the Postal Service that he didn't realize. And on the basis of what he wrote in those letters, they arrested him, not for the Villisca murder. They didn't really even know about that, but of the sending obscene material through the mail. And he was convicted of that, but was so obviously psychotic that they sent him not to Leavenworth, but to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., which was the National Mental Hospital. Still is, by the way. It's a shadow of its former self. It used to be a big institution. But the most famous person in our day was the assassination attempt against Reagan's life. Hinckley, wasn't it? I believe his name was Hinckley.
I'm not sure.
It is Hinckley.
It is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Hinckley, wasn't it?
Yeah, John Hinckley.
Yeah, okay. And that's where they sent him and held him. I believe he's on supervised release now or something.
Yes, he is.
Oh, he is? Huh.
But
Rich,
anyway, for all of those things, he became a suspect. And then they started looking hard at him. And when they couldn't find anyone else and they couldn't find a serial killer, he became the state's only suspect.
Rich, you're up.
Reverend Kelly, they kind of insinuated that because of his size, that was not possible for him to be able to do things like that. We saw the same thing when we started reading the story about Ed Gein. He was small in stature.
Even with the Lizzie case as well.
Exactly. And so we kind of, we got this painted picture that because this guy was 5'2" and 120 pounds, that he couldn't accomplish the crimes that he was being charged with. But what do you think? Do you think he was a serial killer, or do you think that if he was guilty, that the Villisca cases were his only murders?
I think that the Villisca murders were the only ones he committed. As I said, I spent a lot of time trying to place him at these other murders, and I couldn't do it. But I could place him somewhere else, so it was doubly disappointing from that standpoint. The newspapers would carry accounts of the pastor. Reverend Kelly will be preaching at the Methodist Church next Sunday, and the murder happened on that weekend. Now, they didn't do follow-ups. They didn't say the next week that he did preach. And it is possible that he did a lot of traveling. He had a talk that he gave in which he would talk about his experience growing up in England and what England was like and things like that. As a fundraiser, he would put out bills and people would pay 50 cents to come to the lecture. He claims to have given that over 100 times in the Midwest. So he spent a lot of time on the road. My own suspicion is that was partly not only for money, which he always needed, but partly a cover for his window peeking escapades. He would be in a strange town, give the thing, ended at 9 o'clock at night, and then he would prowl the town for 3 hours where nobody knew him and looking for a window to look in. That's just speculation on my part, but that would be motivation for him, the way he acted throughout his life. But there was one other murder that really fascinated me, and I did look into it for a while. I ran into some blank walls on it. There was a murder in Omaha in 1915, I believe. I'd have to look up the date. It was 15, I'm quite sure. And Kelly had been released from the mental hospital in the fall of 14, and pretty late in the fall, November. And he came back to Iowa. He had to come back to Iowa because he was under surveillance. I mean, he wasn't free yet, but he was under surveillance by a probation officer. He was on probation rather than sending him to Leavenworth for the obscene letters. And he lived there until late summer of 15. So he was in Sioux City at that time. Sioux City is not very far from Omaha, hour and a half train ride. And a girl named Ida Swanson, was a young girl working as a domestic servant in a house in Omaha. And she was, her employer was Sykes, was his name. And he was a clerk for the president of the Union Pacific Railroad, which was centered in Omaha at that time. And that would have been a high position. He would have gotten a good salary, and they had a big house, servant. And Sykes went off to work, and his wife went was going for a shopping trip or something, leaving the girl at home, cleaning the house, working the house. She lived in the house. And the wife came home later in the afternoon, and the girl was not to be found, wasn't in the house. And so she didn't get too excited because the girl had said she had a dental. She was going to get her teeth looked at, and the wife didn't know when, and so they didn't make any to do of it until late in the afternoon. Husband comes home. Now they get worried, and so they go downstairs, and in the cellar they find her, and she has been bludgeoned to death, lying on her face, lying face down. And the reason that I got interested in it, and some of the detectives did at the time, was the house was directly across the street from the president of the Omaha seminary that Kelly had been attending, and the seminary itself was next door to the president's house. So it was the intimate. Kelly himself had lived in a house block and a half away, and so he had intimate knowledge of that neighborhood. And just like I couldn't place him at the other murders, I couldn't place him in Sioux City at that time. They tried to do that, and he wasn't, the probation officer hadn't seen him for a week before the murder and over a week after the murder. And that 2-week segment had no idea where he was. And I wondered, one of the testimony, they said, well, she was dressed, the girl was dressed, but one detective wrote a notation that it was true she was dressed, but it didn't look to him like she had done it, because the clothes were not really, they were disheveled, and it sounded like rather extremely so, that either they weren't buttoned or they weren't put on right. The blouse might have been put on backwards. He thought that the killer had undressed her and redressed her. Well, I've wondered about that case. That seemed more like Kelly than anyone else. They didn't find anyone. The case died after 3 months of investigation and so on. She was what they called at that time a green Swede. She was Swedish, Swanson, and she spoke English haltingly and had just come across, I don't know, within 5 years. She was green to the country. She was a new citizen. So the case against Kelly, though, they made a lot about his confession. The confession is interesting, but he fantasized a lot. He could have made up the confession. There's no question in my mind about that.
I was wondering if would you be able to take us back to the crime scene? And is it true that Bert actually had a piece of Mr. Moore's skull? Is that true or is that false? Because I know that it was talked about and he had said to have had it, but I don't ever recall hearing that there was actually it was actually admitted into evidence. I was wondering what your opinion is on the piece of Mr. Moore's skull.
Yeah, it was true.
So he actually had it. It's fact.
Yeah, there was a fellow who was involved in the early investigation and was a suspect, Bert McCall. That's M. That doesn't matter. It's not like you and I think of McCall. It's probably a Scottish name, I think. But anyway, he ran a pool hall, flaming red hair, rock on tour. He would talk to a group, of guys shooting pool. He ran a poker game upstairs in a room, which was illegal in Iowa in those days. It was said, And I think it was true probably that if you were interested in a pint of whiskey, you could get it from Bert if he was sure you weren't a policeman. Uh, Iowa, uh, Iowa had local option liquor in those days, and rural counties were all dry, and urban counties generally were wet. So it was illegal to buy liquor in Montgomery County, but there was a lot of bootlegging went on, and Bert was thought to be involved with that. He also ran an auto livery. He had a car. There weren't many cars in 1912, but you could hire him to take you you didn't have to wait till the train got there. He would take you for a fee and wait and bring you back, that kind of thing. But Bert went through the house, and in the week after the murder, he produced a piece of skull approximately the size of a cigarette pack.
Oh, wow. That's large.
About 3 by 2 inches, not a flat pack or anything like that, but
Oh, okay.
the kind of dominant pack. Yeah, it's a big piece of skull.
That's fairly large. I mean, oh my God.
But he said that to his buddies in the pool hall that he had picked it up as Joe Moore's skull, and he had picked it up when he went through the house as a souvenir, and he brought it back to pool hall, and when that word, of course, as soon as he talked to his buddies, that meant everybody in town knew about it. That was an example of one of the rumors that went everywhere. And Wilkerson heard the rumor, and what Wilkerson did with it was he said, yeah, that was the proof of job or proof of completion, that the Bert took one of the killers. Well, Wilkerson thought there were 3. Only one did the killing, Mansfield. The other 2 were there as backups in case it got out of control. And they all took off like Covey or Coyo and went in different directions. 2 of them walked out because they missed their ride. And the other one, he said that because they were, 2 people were seen walking south of town the morning of the murder. And he wanted to explain that. And the other one, he said, was taken up to about 30 miles by car to Atlantic, where he could get the train that would take him out. And Bert was to pay them the money when the job was complete, and they brought a piece of skull as evidence that it was done successfully, and so he paid them the money, and then everybody scattered. That was the way Wilkerson recreated it. Well, later they got Bert on the stand, and he denied it, that he had ever done it, and said it was just made up. It was, people rumor. But he sold the pool hall about a year after the murder in 1913. And the guy bought it named Long. Long had been running it for several months. Bert had moved to Missouri Valley, Iowa, which is on the Missouri Valley. It's in the Missouri Valley and the Missouri River. And he was now farming, but Long was cleaning out a drawer, pulled it open, and there sat a piece of skull in that drawer. And so he took it out and showed it in the pool hall. But he took it home and showed it to his wife, and she said, "Oh, get that horrid thing out of here. That's terrible."
Oh my God.
And so this was at noon. He had gone home from the morning and ate and came back. And he said, so as I was walking along, I just took it and threw it in the gutter on 3rd Avenue. That's the main street in Villisca that runs down to the depot. And consequently, it got washed away, plowed away, rotted away, and so on. But pretty clear to me that Bert did take it, and I wouldn't be surprised at that. He was as I said, he was a hail fellow, well met, and it's probably seemed like a interesting thing to do. And
Wow.
if you look at the scene, the killer, one of the significant facts was that the killer went, pretty sure, twice to the bed of the adults. And they were much more severely mutilated than any of the kids. The kids were struck with a big, heavy axe. It weighs 4 pounds, 8 ounces, I think, and 4.5 pounds, and it's nearly a yard long. We've got the axes in existence. It's the only artifact except the house that survived, really. And a killer swinging at would those little children, their heads just exploded. Most of them had been struck once, but the adults were completely mutilated. Joe, there was nothing on Joe remaining above the chin except the back of the occipital area of the brain, just the back part of the head was lying on the pillow. Everything else was splattered all over the bed and the bedstead. Mrs. had been hit on top of the head, causing some speculation that she had awakened and rose up in bed, and the killer had hit Joe and swung over and just gave her a clout on top of the head, and she fell back. But then she was cut she's the only person hit with the blade of the axe. Now you can find, as you read about it, some people said that Joe was hit with the blade of the axe, or the kids were hit with the blade of the axe, or everyone was. But the only one that was hit with the blade of the axe was Sarah Moore.
Wow.
And she was struck, in the words of one of the doctors who was on the scene, she was hit starting, well, I didn't know where it started, but it was in the face, a series of slices up across the face, which is one reason that they thought she was not as mutilated so bad, because those cuts stayed together. I mean, they held together, but the doctor said you could open them like an accordion because they'd been cut across the face. There's pretty good evidence, to me at least, that the killer did that after everyone was killed.
Really?
Because two things. One, there was no blood in the cuts in her face, which means that the heart had stopped working and the blood had drained down. I mean, it would drain to the lowest part, generally the visceral area, buttocks, and things like that, so that there was no blood to run out of the cuts in her face. In Joe's case, the blood ran across the pillow and fell into his wife's shoes, which had been put under the bed. They were a softer shoe. And the inside of the shoe had filled with blood. But when it was found, it was tipped over and blood had dropped on the sole of the shoe. And you might say, well, 100 people went through the house, somebody stepped on it and turned it over. Except by the time the people got there, there was no flowing blood anymore. So there was no blood dripping off of the bed. So that had to happen early enough that the blood was still viscous and ran. And it had fallen on the bottom of the shoe. And I interpret that to mean that they both were dead, but before the blood stopped running, they were mutilated more, and so on. That suggests that the killer was moved by a rage, a furious rage. That there's a lot of reasons that Kelly could have felt that rage. Kelly was tiny. You're right on the measurements. 5'2" and 120 pounds when he was arrested in 1917. You're also right that that was one of the reasons that people dismissed him as a suspect, that they just could not conceive of someone as tiny as this being so violent and have the confidence to go in and confront whatever he found once he got there. I can't answer that. Somebody killed him. Although I would point out, I'm from Iowa. we specialize in wrestling, and some of the greatest wrestlers in Iowa history were the 125 pounders and the 119 pounders. There used to be a rate at that level, and those are tiny men. Most of them are 5'4". If they're 6 foot, they're so slender that anybody can throw them around.
Yeah.
So that I was never as bothered by his size as many people. Joe Moore was a big fellow. He was close to 200 pounds and probably 5'10", 11, maybe 6. I don't think he was 6 foot, but probably 5'10" or 11. But he never was confronted standing up. That's another rumor that widely spread about the scene, and that is that there was blood around the house. People will talk about blood spots here and blood. There's very little evidence that anybody awakened, maybe Mrs., but she didn't wake beyond being able to sit up in bed. She wasn't out and drugged back into the bed, and that's all based on the fact of where the blood was found. All of the blood was in the head of the bed where the heads were. No blow was struck below the head. There was talk that the girl downstairs, Lena Stillinger, was struck and she had a defensive wound on her arm. That's a widely believed argument. So she was found with her hands over her head, and the suspicion was that she had thrown her arms over her head and the blade had hit her arm. But the woman who washed the bodies, prepared the bodies, said that was blood, and she washed it off and there was no blood there. There was also rumor that she had a cut on her thigh inside just above the knee, but that too was blood that washed off. She was found, she's the only one that was moved by the killer, looks like. She was found about halfway down in the bed. And so the way most people reconstructed the scene is wrong in my judgment. And that was that she was awakened, and she threw her arms up in a defensive move. The axe hit her arm coming down and cut her arm, and then hit her head as she was sliding down the bed. And she ended up about a third of the way down the bed with her legs going somewhat crossways across the bed. She was found on her right hip with the nightgown pulled up, and they explained that as sliding down the bed had pulled up her nightgown. She was basically naked from the waist down. Her left leg had been brought over her right leg, exposing the genitals. The lamp was found at the foot of the bed. The chimney had been removed and rolled under the dresser on the east wall of the bedroom. The beds ran north and south. For some reason, the people that showing the house now. Commercially, you pay a fee to go through the house, and they give you a lecture about it. They've got that red bed running east and west. I'm not sure why they did that, but it's very clear from the testimony that occurred at the time of the murder from the marshal, the county attorney, or the county coroner, the 4 doctors who went there. They all agreed the bed was north and south, all of that. But those people reconstruct it that way. But I don't think that's right. Since there wasn't any defensive wound on the arm, and her arms were like this, but one of her hands was lying in a pool of blood on the pillow. So I think what happened was that, well, she had to be killed before she was down here, because her head was a third of the way down the bed by the time that she was found. And I think what happened was that the killer struck her on when she was on the pillow, and then either her arms remained over her head, or more likely he put them over her head. He rolled her over on her side, moved one leg up to expose her, and then he had the lamp for light. I explain that as why he covered the mirrors as well. The mirror, there's a photograph in the book of the mirror. That's about the only photograph of the scene that I'm aware of. I'm not sure when it was taken. It was taken by the Des Moines Register. I'm pretty sure of that. That's where I got it. And I think that was original to them. They had a reporter on the scene the day of the murder. As soon as they heard of that, they sent a young reporter to Villisca, and be a 3-hour train ride, or maybe a little more. And so he was there the day of the murder, and he might have gotten in and photographed that picture. But anyway, the killer, if you look at, he closed the house completely, very carefully. He pulled all the shades down. And then he closed the glass in the front door. He took a skirt out of the dresser and pinned it up so it was carefully closed. He obviously did not want any light to get out. He didn't want people. And there's a reason for that. If you're walking along at 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning and you see a house lighted, it would be possible in Iowa for a person to, in those days, to come up and knock on the door and say, is there trouble here? I mean, is someone sick? Should I get a doctor? Could I help? And Kelly didn't want that kind of an interruption, if it's Kelly, or the killer didn't want that kind of interruption. So anyway, he covered all of that, but the mirror is not covered the same way. The mirror is a very casual covering. If you look at it, it's a lyre back dresser with a full, a mirror that's 2.5 feet by 1.5 feet, pretty good sized mirror. And the killer had taken a black skirt, it looks like to me, and he started at the upper right corner as you're looking at the mirror, and he brought it over, and then he brought it at an angle down to the bottom, and he left about 3-4 inches on the bottom that kind of drape off this way, and the same at the bottom, and it goes up to a narrower thing. He covered most of the mirror, but he wasn't careful enough or cared enough to cover it absolutely completely like he did the doors. I think what happened was that the killer, if you focus on that downstairs bedroom, it's a sexually motivated murder. He wanted to see this naked girl. And he wanted to see her and was uninterrupted. And he masturbated while looking at her. I'm pretty confident. Then I think after he did that, I think he killed the two girls downstairs last. And then after that, maybe he was remorseful. Maybe he was worried about his parents and what they would think of him for doing something like this. And then he went back upstairs, and in a fury, he erased the adults in the house so that they had been struck once, and half an hour later, he came upstairs and made sure they were dead, maybe. Now, that's the movie people, they theorized that while he was killing, he killed the parents first, and while he was killing the children upstairs, one of the bodies made an involuntary noise, as could happen, gurgle or a jerk, a spontaneous twitching of a muscle. And he heard it and was frightened that they might still be alive. And so he went in and beat them to confidence. So he was confident of their death. That could be. But I think it's more voluntary. I look at it as he was sexually driven to see the girl, and that's why he killed them all. He may well have been window peeking and seen them. They were undressing in that room and sleeping in that room. And he looked at them, and they got dressed in night clothes too quickly. And he was left frustrated. And the axe was in the back, literally in the backyard, leaning against a wood pile, just a little ways away. And the idea, if everybody was dead, I could look at her all night if I wanted to. And that was his motivation. If your focus is that it was a crime of fury, and this girl scooted down in the bed and exposed herself, and he threw a blanket over her, and that he did. I'm not sure why he closed the house and all of that, and maybe he closed the mirror. Lots of people have speculated, and there is a lot of superstition about that the killer was following kind of funeral customs. When Abraham Lincoln was lying in state, they draped all the mirrors were covered with crepe. And that's true in England. When a body is lying in state, certain Jewish traditions do that, and so on. It's pretty common to cover mirrors if you've got a corpse in the house. That's not so unusual. But I don't think that's why he did it. I think why he did it was because when he was standing there, the light flickering, this is a kerosene or coal oil lamp, and it's flickering. When that was happening, he could get a flash of himself. You're standing there, all of a sudden there's a figure standing almost beside you. That room's small. He didn't like that. I mean, either he didn't want to see himself, or he took a start, and to control that, he just threw that skirt over the mirror, and then you couldn't see it anymore.
Rich, do you have any final questions as we begin to wrap up this interview?
No, I want to, this has been fascinating story to hear, and I want to thank Ed for joining us today.
Absolutely.
And giving us all these details beyond what he wrote in the book.
Yes.
And I recommend to all of our watchers and subscribers if you want a creepy story about a creepy crime, this really is this Villisca story. And the interesting side note that I have is that the book that I wrote about Lizzie Borden and the culprit that I suggest was responsible for the death of the Bordens, Mr. and Mrs. Borden, is now buried approximately 10 miles away from Villisca out in Iowa.
Uncle, what was it? Uncle?
Uncle John.
Uncle
John.
Morse.
Yeah, that's right. I've been there. I got a photograph of the grave because somebody made that suggestion. Maybe if he killed them, or killed Lizzie, or Lizzie's parents, maybe he did this other murder. But the trouble is, he was buried in January of 1912, if I remember right from the stone.
Yeah, so
he was dead when the murder happened.
He was dead about 6 months before the murders occurred.
Do you think it's possible that John did business with Joe Moore? John was in like the animal butcher industry, and Joe Moore being a tractor or a farming supply company. Do you find it possible that they could have done business together, being so close?
Certainly could be possible. It might be more common that he would have met a brother of Joe Moore, Charlie Moore, who was a butcher. He had a butcher shop in Villisca. Yeah.
And Ed, I have one final question, and this is sort of like a fun question that I ask everybody. It was, if you could sit down for a cup of coffee and ask like Joe Moore or Reverend Kelly, I'll let you choose, one question. If you could ask them one question, what would it be?
Oh,
who would it be, and what would it be?
Yeah. I think I would ask Kelly if he was window peeking that night.
So you're convinced that it. So you
well,
believe
what
it.
The reason I would do that was that it would have been very easy for him to window peek, and some people have suggested, quite a few people, that they don't think Kelly did it, and one of the reasons they explain that he couldn't have done it was not only his size, but he didn't have any history. He was not a serial killer in the sense you can't associate him with any other murders except maybe the Swanson murder, but I'm the only one that really talks about that anymore. But they suggested maybe he saw it happen.
Yeah.
That's why he would have some intimate detail that he could have put in letters, and that's why he was so obsessed by it and things like that. And I was just curious whether he would say, yeah, I was peeking. I talked to a lawyer, Jonathan Richards. One of the problems when you live in a rural area and do this is everyone assumes you're a country bumpkin, and that's not always true. Jonathan Richards was a Harvard graduate, law school, and his father was one of the prosecuting lawyers in one of the cases, and he was an older man when I met him. I got a lot of records from him, by the way, including the one that really crucial, and that was the grand jury investigation that led to Kelly's indictment and ended the case against Jones. But he had heard that theory, and I asked him, well, what do you think of that? Could Kelly have been looking in the window? And he said he could, but he said I think it's too big a coincidence, too great a coincidence for me, Jonathan, to accept. He said, because if he was, you had to have, by chance, that night, someone mentally ill enough to do the murder, and at the same time, someone as mentally ill as Kelly was sitting outside watching the murder.
Yeah.
He said, I can't believe that would, you'd have two people in the town. Well, that would have meant Kelly was guilty.
Yeah.
And the really crucial piece of evidence was a testimony by a man and wife named Simmons. If you leave Villisca on the train, you go through Red Oak, and west of Red Oak, you come to a place called Hastings Junction, which is a stop on the railroad where people can get off and get a little town. It's gone now. I think it's close to where Uncle John lived. If I remember right, I went to Hastings Junction, I think, to get to the cemetery. But anyway, then if you leave Sydney, Iowa, which is a even smaller town, way down in the very southwest corner, and you come north on the train, you get to Hastings Junction. And that morning, this couple, Simmons, Mr. and Mrs. William, I think, they came on the train and they got to Hastings Junction, and they got there sometime between 6 and 7 in the morning. And they got on the train that was going to go north to Macedonia and then Carson. Two towns are very close together. And Kelly was coming west on the train. And Kelly was their preacher now. And he got on the train that morning. And he came walking down the aisle of that train, and he put his hands on the seat back behind these two who were in his parish. And he said to them, the most terrible thing that happened in the world happened in Villisca last night. A whole family was killed. And he was agitated and nervous. And on the way to Macedonia, he talked about children were killed and things like that. And they got to Macedonia, he got off. And they ran on to Carson. And that was the basis that they finally, that was the most telling piece of information that the prosecutors had. But it got muddied in the trial because first they tried to get it thrown out. And the Simmons were old people, not old by my age, but they were 70 something. And they, oh my, I'll give you a little personal history here in just a minute, but they testified about him getting trained. Well, when was it? And the best they could do was say early in June. And the state used that to get railroad records of tickets sold. And they found that on the morning of June 10th, there was a ticket, 2 tickets sold at Sydney, and 1 ticket sold that went to Hastings and then north to Carson. Oh no, 2 to Carson and 1 to Macedonia. The 2 from Carson came from Sydney, and the other one came from Villisca, which matches Kelly meeting the Simmons on the train. And there was no other ticket sold from Sydney to Carson, Villisca to Hastings, the month of June. And that was on the 10th of June, the day the murder was discovered. Well, that took place an hour and a half before the murder house was open. So Kelly either saw the murder take place or did the murder.
I want to thank you for coming on to our program today.
Oh, it's great. I love it.
I would love to have
You shouldn't say that about a murder like this, I guess, but it's been a lifetime for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. In your book, you said 60 years of research.
I was sitting in a modified barber chair at Mayo Clinic this year in September, the day I turned 90.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I have lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. I've gone through chemotherapy, which is why my hair never looks very good anyway, but now I've got a top knot because I lost all my hair. And then I did radiation, and 2.5, 3 weeks ago, I went back and got another PET scan and put a tube down my throat to look at the stomach and said, we don't have any sign of it. It seems to be gone now.
That's awesome.
Partly, besides, I'll always talk about Villisca, but I wanted to partly to see how much strength do I have? Can I recall the things? Can I talk about it? And I think I can. I feel good about it.
I think so. I would love to have you back on to discuss the trials in depth. We haven't really analyzed the trials, but you put a lot of work into your book on the trials, so possibly a future episode where we dive into the trials. I'll be in touch via email.
If you decide to do it, I'll be glad to meet you both.
Awesome. Rich, I think you have the book right here.
Yes, I do have it. I have Ed's book right here, and there it is, everybody. When I came here this morning, I felt old, but now that Ed has revealed his age, and me being a young 83, I feel
Hey,
refreshed.
you're just getting started.
Exactly.
I don't even want to know what that makes me. 26.
So everyone,
that puts you in charge. Old people are never in charge.
So I hope everybody follows the link that Seth is going to put in our
Description.
in the description of the podcast. And again, everybody, and Ed, thank you very much for being with us. And all those people out there, keep those comments coming and subscribe if you haven't. And thank you very much.
And with that,
that's it. And thank you very much, everybody. Keep those cards and letters coming. Keep the comments coming. And we appreciate you.
thank you guys. Bye.